Now, this isn't meant to be any sort of this is the only way to draw heads thing. I've never been a big fan of the whole how to draw kind of thing, but like there are so many ways to draw heads or people or anything, and my first advice to anyone when they want to know how to draw something is reference. If you don't know how to draw something, look up a picture. And when it comes to anatomy, learn the muscles and the bones. There's no substitute for having a muscle chart in your head. And that's something that it sounds intimidating, but it's actually quite fun. Maybe I'm just a nerd. It was fun for me. Basically, you just look up muscle charts, practice drawing them, learn how the muscles and the bones fit together, and draw it to the point where you can draw a muscle chart from your head. So that is my main advice for anatomy. You'll learn it yourself. There's no substitute. Don't just copy someone else's style. However, I am here to share some of the shortcuts that I've developed for drawing heads. So here you see a couple drawings I've already done. Aro, my friends OC Julia, and my D&D character Demian. I might as well start with Aro because I draw him all the time. So whenever I draw a head, I always start with a circle, and that's a pretty typical tip that I think most people give. But this can work for any angle, really. I'll do a 3/4 angle because that's the angle that you'll be drawing more often than not. So after I do the head, I think of this as the cranium of the skull, and then you find like a halfway point. I don't really find this anymore because it's kind of second nature to me at this point, but it's kind of the sideline where the ear goes on, and bring down the jaw from there. Oh, I almost forgot this is Aro. He has a narrower jaw than that. So some characters, they'll have like a thicker jaw, and the point here will come down more than others. And this is kind of a stylistic thing I do as well. But it all comes in at the same halfway point. It helps to find this middle line. I don't actually think of this middle line very often or draw it, but it can be helpful, especially when you're starting. The next thing I always add is the ear, which I always end up having to move it because I usually draw it too low, but it helps as a placeholder. I like having it there. After that, I put in the eye sockets. Now, if you've ever studied classical proportions of the face, then you know that the way the proportions go, the eyes are on the halfway mark, and then the nose halfway between the eyes and chin, and then the mouth halfway between the nose and chin. And that can vary a teeny bit, but overall, those proportions will remain fairly similar in most faces. Some eyes might be a little higher or lower, some noses and mouths might change in their location, but overall, it's best not to vary too much from that, especially when you're beginning. The hairline and the eyebrow line tend to be on the quarters, like there's not really anything at the halfway point. The hairline's up here, and the eyebrows here. And actually, fun trick, the ears go from the eye line to the line at the bottom of the nose. And that's a major help for me. When someone told me that, it blew my mind. Now I know where to put the ears. All right, so the eye sockets, for me, usually about like just a circle or a diamond shape. Just drawing the eyes on there, if you're not familiar with how the head is put together, they can feel a bit like stickers, like they're just placed onto the face. It's a lot more complicated than that. The eye socket goes in and then the eye is placed within that socket. I find that drawing the socket, it helps me find the location of those eyebrows and then know where to put the eyes in. So I'll draw a little circle, or in Aro's case, a little triangle where those eyes will go. After that, I either draw the nose or the hairline. I'll go with the hairline next. This tends to curve in a little, and this part here basically helps me map out the forehead, and I'll often end up bringing in the forehead a little bit more. And I also usually end up shrinking my circle a bit from its original size. Just because you have that circle there at the beginning doesn't mean you have to stick to it. It's not the law. It's okay if you end up shrinking or expanding that circle a little bit. People do tend to draw heads a little bit too big, especially if you're used to drawing anime. It helps to know the size of that cranium. Fixing up the jawline a little bit, finding the cheekbone. And then I move on to the nose. One thing I found is that if I draw the mouth before I draw the nose, I always end up regretting it because then I don't leave space for the nose. So I've trained myself to draw the nose next. And Aro has a particularly glorious nose. Erasers are an artist's best friend, guys. All right. Refining as you go. As you get used to drawing a character, you become more familiar with their proportions and what looks right and what doesn't. And see, I drew the ear too high. Actually, I think that's what you usually draw it too high, not too low. And then mouth. If think his cranium is just a little too big. You're constantly refining. All right, at this point I get excited and I usually go into the neck. Neck and shoulder anatomy is like one of my favorite things on the planet. I could get deeper into the neck anatomy, but I don't know if I could do it with this particular drawing. So please don't use this as your only training for anatomy, because there's a lot of muscles and stuff that I don't know, and things that I haven't noticed that will be helpful to you. I'll just go into neck anatomy later. Now you can add on the hair. You can add on the hair whenever you want. You don't have to do it in this order. Having the hairline helps. Usually the hair comes out a little bit from the hairline, so that's where some of that mass comes. But if you know where the cranium is, then you can avoid mistakes such as not having enough weight in the back of the head. If you're not sure where the cranium is, then sometimes you can end up making the mistake of drawing the hair where the brain is supposed to be and like not giving the head enough weight. For example, like if I had, I'm gonna mess this up real quick, done this. Looks really weird because his brain, his skull is supposed to go out to here. It's gonna look weird if it's not covering the entire skull. If I drew Aro like that, I would put him in the comic without, I might try and fix it a little bit. Yay. Okay, so that's my process for drawing heads.